also fired
when
Steve
Donald
Bannon.
Trump talks about picking the wrong people, I don't think he's talking about picking people who weren't smart, picking people who weren't talented. He was talking about picking people who weren't loyal enough. And the next biggest decision that he's going to make, Tara, is going to be about who is going to be his attorney general. This is a position that is a linchpin position for Trump and his agenda. He wants this person to, according to him, prosecute his enemies, enforce immigration policy, drop the cases against himself and perhaps his associates, investigate his 2020 election lies, perhaps pardon January 6th rioters. So that's a tall order, and he needs somebody who's basically going to say, yes, sir, and go and do it.
Right, and I spoke to someone who is up for this role, and they were told me you have to be bold and fearless. That is the qualification that Donald Trump is looking for. But really, that means loyal. That means willing to go to the brink and do what he says. And as you know, he has a tall list. I mean, going after political enemies, I mean, they call it going after Democratic lawfare. Essentially, I think what I was told at the top of the list, the priority is to go after the prosecutors who went after Donald Trump. Wow. They are the top of the enemy list, essentially. So this person can't be anything like Jeff Sessions, no recusals. There's no case in which you can say, I don't feel comfortable with this. And so, yes, perhaps you have to be bold and fearless to be willing to go along with it.
Yeah, I mean, the list, according to our reporting, is some of the people being considered: Ken Paxton, the Texas Attorney General; Andrew Bailey, Missouri Attorney General; Matt Whitaker, who was the former acting Attorney General in the Trump administration; Senator Mike Lee; and John Ratcliffe, the former Director of National Intelligence. Scott?
Yeah, there's a couple of other names I've heard floating around, too. Look, this is an important choice. This, defense, state, you know, these are the Treasury. I mean, these are some of the main cabinets. But just to go back to Susie for a second, the fact that he got to this first and the fact that she is going to have, you know, influence over how the rest of this transition unfolds, whether it's picking attorney general or any of these other high-level positions, I think we ought to all look at this as a wise decision, a good decision. And for everybody out there wanting Trump to pivot or change or somehow whatever you want him to do, he just won a mandate from the American people to execute on the program that he laid out in this election. It wasn't particularly close. And I think he ought to put people in place who are going to do it. That's what the people are asking for.
Who will go after his enemies? I mean, that's
not what he ran on.
Yes, he did.
It is explicitly what he ran on.
That's not what he ran on.
Look at what he said in the past week. He literally said that he was going to exact vengeance.
You still don't understand how you lost. He ran on immigration.
Don't say me. I'm not a Democrat.
He ran on immigration.
I'm a journalist.
He ran on inflation.
I'm not here paid
to
represent
one of the many things he ran on in addition to
he ran on the issues that people care about. He ran on the economy. He ran on
nobody's saying that he didn't run on those things, but he also ran on vengeance.
Yes.
He did also run on going after the people who went after him.
And journalists.
It was a key feature of all of his speeches.
Yes, Scott, he literally said, I am your retribution, the Biden crime family, lock her up. Went after Sessions repeatedly for not doing what he wanted Sessions to do, which was to indict Hillary or whoever he wanted to indict.
You can want his campaign to have been about, tax reform and things like that. That is not what he said on the stump. Time after time after time.
Also
he talked about going after his enemies.
I'm heartened by the fact that the left still cannot figure this out.
Even if you just take the January 6th part of it, he made that a big part of his campaign, that he would, if he were in power, pardon those people. You can't say that was not on the agenda. It absolutely was.
What was the campaign about? Why did tens
Okay, but do you
of
think that
millions
he's
of
going to
people...
do those other things when it comes to the Department of Justice?
I don't know what he's going to do. I don't talk to him.
A big part of the campaign was being a victim. Like, that was a big part of it, was his victimhood. They're coming for you, but they're going to have to get through me. That was his whole line. That is all about the enemies list. That is all.
I totally disagree.
The deep state. This is the stuff that he talked about on the stump. Unless you just don't want to listen to him. Those are his own words.
I listen plenty.
Scott, if you believe that people who violated the Capitol on January 6th committed a crime, which I would hope you would, because they weren't invited in the way they claimed they were, right? They were not there. They didn't go through security the way the rest of us have to go through to get into the Capitol. They were prosecuted. They were convicted. And now they're serving jail time. And he has said repeatedly that they're political prisoners and he is going to spring them, right? What does that tell you about how he's going to weaponize the Justice Department and on whose behalf? On behalf of people who committed crimes for him, for him, not for anybody else.
I mean, I admire your, I don't know if I want to call it naivete or optimism that Trump is going to run on the policies you care about deregulation and tax cuts and whatnot. That's just not what his campaign was about.
Well,
That's not
I
what he
think-
has
I think-
indicated his
with all
will
due
do.
respect, I've run more campaigns than you, and I know what campaigns are about, and I know why people walk into voting booths.
Why
and you're
people
totally
walk into
wrong.
gotta go,
voting
guys.
booths and what Trump plans to do when handed the presidency are two different things.